Okay, as a member of the Finance and Audit Committee, I'd like to call to order the Budget Review Committee meeting for Monday, April 20th, 2026. We have 4 board members in attendance along with several executive staff members. And at this time, I'll turn it over to the Superintendent, Dr. Wortling.
Thank you, Mr. Al. Thank you for board members for being here this afternoon or this morning, one of many meetings today. As you see by your agenda attached to assembly as well as documented, we have several items including a sales tax update as well as a projected budget overview by Mr. Neighbors and a few other things. So at this point in time, I will turn it over to Ms. Paul Johnson for the first agenda item, which is a sales tax update.
Good morning. I just put on a brief presentation together to give you a little update of our department. We're going to talk about the year-to-date collections, the collections comparison to fiscal year, calendar year 24 versus calendar year 25. Then we'll talk about some trends, some budgeting factors that we consider, and then talk about our audit collections. So for this fiscal year, for July through February sales tax collections, which we receive in March, we have not yet received the April collections. They're in the system, but we can't take them in and deposit them yet. So this presentation just goes through February activity collected in March. Our top 20 taxpayers, you can see we had an increase of about $2 million, close to $2 million from this point last year. We had for the total reporting period, we budgeted, we had $87 million collected, proposed to be collected, and that's just based on projecting the remaining months out. We had $82 million we collected last fiscal year at this point in time. So we do project an increase of about $5 million, which is a 6.2% increase, which is a little bit over budget for the sales tax collections only. And then we have 4 remaining months, of course. The school board portion of this is a $3 million increase. As you all recall, we collect for the entire parish. So we're projected to hit about $52 million. We are at $52 million. We're projected to collect the difference. So just a little comparison from calendar year to calendar year. The parish is on a calendar year, so I usually do this for them, and so I just wanted to share with you guys and show where the variances were high in March period, collecting April of last year. We had some big audit collections and a big renewable fuel project, so that kind of raised our revenue. Then it was high again in October, but we had some overpayments because it looked, based on the collections, we went back and noticed some of the taxpayers were oddly off, and so we had to refund those overpayments the next month. Then we had another large audit collection in December, and then we just had a little under activity in the following month. So you could see where our increase is there and what causes the fluctuations. You never know what you're going to get each month, so it's definitely not a flat line. I like to go back to when I started here in fiscal year 2004, fiscal year 2005. And you can see how things change and go up and down. When the graph, the numbers come down, like fiscal year 10 and fiscal year 15, there were absolutely no projects, no expansions in St. Charles Parish at those times. And so then that's always what I call our base year. Now we have inflation, and then we had in 2020, we had the Wayfair case, really, which was in 2018, and then 2020 is when the legislature enacted the Remote Sellers Commission, so we started collecting more online sales, and so you could see a little going up, increase in revenue. I project without any projects, our revenue's somewhere around 60,000. But we've had a lot of projects, so our revenue's kind of gone up.
60 million?
I think that's the flat line when there's no expansions. That's just, as you can see, with remote sellers and I guess inflation, I believe it's more like it's 60 million for sales tax. And that's kind of conservative too. You know, I don't really know because we watch the spending. You'll see in the factors part of it. So when we're factoring our budget, we look at several things. When projects come to an end, you see that increase in revenue, but you know they're going to come in, they're going to end, and if they don't have another project coming behind it, we're going to have a decrease. So we do try to monitor when these projects all come to an end. We've done that over the years, and we just need to know when we're going to see a huge decrease. We keep in mind that when we get these applications for incentives, they're not sworn affidavits, the projects are not guaranteed, and we're going to try and see if we could see why there's a big discrepancy on any of them. I had mentioned in one of the past meetings that the numbers on those sheets are unicorns. Until you get it, it's not yours. We're on a cash basis. Adam and I talked about that. There is a trend currently in a particular account. We look to see why that account is big, because we don't see everything through LED. We just kind of look to see why different businesses are trending up and understand the projects from that perspective as well. We also notice overpayments when we have to contact companies that have never paid us, and they're like, oops, that's not your parish. So sometimes, oops, I paid you the state. So we do monitor those trends and that are material. We adjust for inflation and consider seasonality, and we look at consumer spending. And also, it's hard to predict. We have no control over what impacts our collections. It's very little information, so all we have are the numbers. We don't know what all these companies are doing. And the ones that specifically are identified in our trends here are, I mentioned earlier, I think without industry expansion, our baseline is between 55 and 60 million. Remote sellers started in 2020. That has been a huge increase for us. Now that is a total number for the parish, and school board at 500,000 can go up to 700,000 around Christmas time. That's sales taxes, so that's really nice. So we like to look at car sales and remote sellers to see really what consumer spending and some of our large retailers. It's kind of flat. It's not really increasing over the last few years. And so far, just based on what we see in our account, we will be higher this April than last April. I'm not sure where we will be year to date at this point. And so we're still on track to meet the sales tax budget as originally projected for this fiscal year. And last, our audit collections. I like to just give a little kudos to our department. In fiscal year 2025, we collected $2.7 million in audit taxes, penalties, and interest. This year, it's just year to date, so we still have a few more months. I'm not anticipating any big dollars coming in yet. I don't think any of the big audits are scheduled to be completed before this fiscal year ends, but we're already at $3 million, and that's parish and school board. We assessed, out of the audits that we've done, we've assessed 29 this year, and last year we assessed 38, and we do have audits that we just don't have an assessment because they were in compliance. Any questions?
Ms. Johnson, are you following any current legislation relative to sales tax, unified?
I don't believe that's going to come up again this year. Based on the hearing, it seemed like the authors of the bill or the people who were sponsoring are getting, didn't really have enough information or satisfy enough of the parties that it would affect. So I don't think it's going to come back up. I'll keep you posted, but.
Centralized, I say unified.
Right, centralized sales tax collection. But again, it'll be there next year. every year.
Could you go over the audit assessment without assessment? What is that?
Okay, so let me go backwards. We have currently completed this fiscal year to date 51 audits. Is that right? 51, my math.
Yeah.
And we've assessed 29 of them. The 22 are the ones that we may have audited, but they didn't owe us any money.
Okay.
So that's why I
So
separated
you
out.
did it, you went in, you audited it, it was correct, essentially would be the right way.
Essentially correct, or too immaterial to do.
Is that on average, what those numbers should look like? I mean, it seems just to me that that's a lot of audits that don't result in anything. Is that fair? Or is that what we
So
would
some of those-
should normally see?
I don't know I don't compare our parish to anybody else ever, but what we do is we contract some of our audits out of the large retailers and St. Charles Parish might be a small part of those retailers, and maybe our residents don't use some of those retailers, but other, like Baton Rouge or New Orleans may, so we will get a no finding or audit out of it. So it's just, that's usually the case, where they've been identified as someone who is a retailer that needs to be remitting, and sometimes they are remitting.
And then is there a cost associated to us, the school board in particular, on these audits that don't
So when we
essentially
do
bring
them
back any
in-house,
money?
It's our regular salary people, and those audits usually take maybe a few hours to identify whether or not somebody has a liability, or if it's something that we contract with the rest of the state. We have a threshold that we say, I need to know within 12 hours whether or not you think that there's an assessment. So we don't give anybody an open checkbook, so the cost is minimal.
Some of those audits are randomly selected, right?
Yes. Or, sometimes we get our local residents will call and say, hey, so-and-so, they have a suspicion, and we always follow them. We follow everybody's leads.
Has there ever been a company that has had multiple audits without assessment?
If a company is audited with no assessment, I am not going to spend my time going back to them. No.
And then if there's no other questions, I had one more. You sure? Going back to the projections, how close have we been on what was projected versus what actually came in over a 5-10 year average?
We have always been over budget from collections. This year, I'm a little worried because we went up 6%, which we've never done. We've always gone, budgeted 2% or 1%, depending on whether or not we weren't sure about the projects. But this was the first year we ever went up to 6%. And I do think it's very likely we're going to hit it.
And that process would fall now in your hands, right? You would have,
I do it because I have more data than you guys.
okay.
And then I meet with Ronald, because I do it for the parish as well. Sorry. So sorry.
Yeah, so we're confident then that since 2004, I mean, if you're the one responsible for the projection, is that what I'm hearing?
I give the data to
To the
Adam.
CFO, and then the CFO can adjust it as they deem, so ultimately then it's on you, but you're using data from there.
it's kind of
I
a
would
team
like to see, or if we know from 2004 to today, what that variances look like on average, just so that we've got a book, kind of what's the word I'm looking for?
Baseline.
Thank you. A baseline, so that so as a board, we need to know, do we need to have a little bit more, do we need to be more conservative, et cetera? But I would like a baseline since 2004 to 9, if we could
So
on that.
I do my projections for the parish and the school board, and I know over the years, depending on what the CFO thought, sometimes they change them. I think Ronald and I both agreed on the 6%, and because we thought it would be a little bit more. And we were trying to be a little conservative, and I think we are gonna hit that 6%.
So, Mr.
But I
Neighbors,
will
can
do
you
the
just
numbers.
like
So
follow up with Mr.
I could
Johnson?
show you what I give, my numbers every year, and then I guess Ronald, if I do it again, you're gonna, Adam's gonna,
Mrs. Johnson, if you could furnish an electronic copy of your presentation to at least the board members in attendance today.
okay.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Al. That was going to ask for that. I think one of the things, in going back to 2004 or 5, when you look at trying to project that increase from a project, a turnaround, a expansion, new project, whatever it might be, especially if turnaround, they can probably, some of these facilities will be able to tell you, I believe, but like new projects and expansions, where we are today in 2026 or the last couple of years versus where we were 20 years ago, it's a permitting environment that's very tough. So I'd be cautious to not to any, I would say this to any sales tax office anywhere, no matter what's in that LED, and I would even be careful on that one, just because some of those numbers that go to LED fast track those are done many, many years in advance, and it could be some technologies that may have come into play that could change the particular sales tax numbers. But I would highly encourage anyone, just from an operational standpoint, just be very cautious of putting it in there until that shovel's like really in the ground. Even if you just way over, don't count on it all if need be. Let's see. And I guess to Mr. Cody's point, the flat line kind of 55, 60 million, I know that probably went up probably because of the remote sellers the last couple of years. And you answered my question on the 6%, so appreciate it, thanks.
Any other questions?
Okay, the next agenda item is legislative update. Mr. Neighbors?
Morning, everybody. A lot of the handouts, unfortunately, are going to be in paper just because it was easier to walk them through a little bit physically with you guys. The first one in the
Mr. Neighbors, for the future purposes, we had a short discussion. We're going to try to minimize paper copies unless requested by board.
can do.
And that's going to be for all executive staff. No, Johnny, Dave.
Yeah, this is first crack at this one, so I'm trying to follow some previous models. The first item in the packet is the legislative update. I just want to give you just a quick update on some of the few things that are moving. Some of this information was presented previously, but I wanted to provide some updates as to the status of some of those. The packet's only about a few pages long, but the first couple pages talk about some of the current acts and amendments that were passed last year, but the amendments are going before the voters this year in this cycle in the May election. So I just wanted to mention briefly, the first one in the packet talks about the business inventory tax. As you were aware, last year there was a process and a few bills that were passed to start the movement to, in so many words, exempt the business inventory process, so that the various local entities could carve out or basically exclude certain amounts from the inventory. Those acts did pass, and now the update to this is that, number one, this is Amendment 4 that's occurring on this upcoming election. So I kind of highlighted that down in the bottom section. But also, even if that amendment does pass, all of the local taxing entities have to agree to provide for that sort of exemption. So all the entities such as the sheriff, the school board, and the parish would also have to agree to, in so many words, have that amendment be enforced. So we do have, even if the amendment does pass, there is some additional wiggle room in terms of moving that type of specific amendment forward. But that is coming up on the May election. Like I said, some of this is just some of the high-level documentation that was previously provided, but I wanted to highlight some of the changes. Moving to page 3.
Mr. Neighbors, if you don't mind, as you go through each one, if we would just pause and see if there are any questions from board members and then proceed to the next one. Thank you.
Any questions before I move past the inventory?
Are we taking, position may not be the right words of my words here, but on this inventory tax or the May 16th election?
So the only time that we actually take any type of position is when they're currently in the session and it's being proposed for legislation. So that was already approved to be on this election, so there's no official stance from our standpoint.
And just for clarity, I think you did, but just if I can expand for a second, on the inventory tax one, which is Amendment 4. No part of this, if it passes, no part of it requires any local taxing body. Number one, as the neighbor said it, all three, or all taxing bodies have to approve it. So for example, in St. Charles, it's council, school board, and sheriff need to approve any adjustment to it. You cannot make any adjustment to it now unless that passes. An adjustment could be any number of creative ways. And then if you make an adjustment, it does not mean that you have to eliminate as a whole. It could be cut 1% over the next 15 years or whatever. It could be any creative way that you come up with. So just for clarity, that's all.
Thank you, Mr. Griggs. All right. Any more questions on the inventory legislation before we move forward? No. All right. Moving on to page 3. This was the constitutional amendment, and the proposed that's moving into what's going to be on this upcoming election is Amendment 3. This is the retirement and the trust funds, in so many words, liquidation or realignment that would provide for an additional a salary increase to various teacher personnel as funded by those savings. So this is the one that's been already passed last year, and this is the Amendment 3 that is going forth before the voters on May 16th. This is the matter of the pay raises and then the funding and the kind of the restructuring of a lot of those trust funds that existed previously. Like I said, this was just providing a quick update that those legislations were passed, and now we've moved to the amendment phase, which is before the voters.
And if I could just mention briefly, one thing as I'm presenting across the parish relative to our millage renewals, this is now a topic that I'm bringing up at each one of my presentations because there are a lot of questions. I know several board members we've discussed this and where you are receiving feedback in your, who you represent, your area where you represent. For clarity purposes, this amendment that's on the ballot currently is much different than it was last year. So whereas last year we had taken a stance against this type of amendment because it was attached to so many other things, on this ballot, this would provide us the opportunity to pay less towards TRSL accrued liability, save more money on a year in, year out basis, and afford the pay raise that would be required by legislation. Generally speaking, we are against legislation that would direct us on how to spend funds, especially when you consider the amount of investment we have made in our own people the last few years, specifically because 70% of our budget really comes from locally generated taxes, which is why, generally speaking, we're against the legislature telling us what to spend with our local dollars. However, in the end, this would be more of a savings on the end every year for us, because we're saving more on the backside that we're paying in interest towards TRSL. That really doesn't go towards benefit, it just goes towards debt. So I'm speaking in favor of this amendment for us as a organization because it would amount in savings and a benefit to our teachers and educators.
Do we know and I think I looked through the amendment, the act the other day, and I don't recall seeing the exact percentage that it drops. I want to say we're paying like 21.5%.
Yes, sir.
I'm close.
21.1.
Okay. Is it about 5%, or does it depend on the actual values when they pay it off? And
Yeah, I think that part is still to be determined in terms of the actual effects once the amendment actually does
they'll do a
pass.
recalculation basically, and then I got it.
They will, and then they'd obviously need to distribute that out to the various participating entities.
Well, I think too, and I don't know how this will calculate, but St. Charles is not going to benefit from this, but some parishes who can't afford those raises, if the raises are more than the savings, the state's going to fund that, but I don't know if it's going to, I don't know what bucket that money's coming from. And is it coming from the savings that gets released, or I'm not sure.
Yes, sir. On the bottom of page 3, that funding, that additional level of funding would come through the MFP program.
It would basically be backfilled.
Yes, that's right,
So
that's
what the
right.
governor's suggesting, especially for those systems that can't, they'll come up with some affluent formula similar to what they do right now with us for withholding money to go to charter schools. Just the opposite. They'd identify what parishes could not afford the pay raise and would backfill it via MFP. Also, we had discussions, the Louisiana Association of School Superintendents and Administrators, which I'm currently an officer of, had a meeting with the governor's office last week relative to even the distributions of the EEF funds. Like every year, we still get, 800,000, whatever, I don't know, don't quote me, whatever it is, it's not more than $700,000 to be used for specific purposes. That currently funds our interventionists, some of our math interventionists. The governor's office is in discussions with us and really all school systems relative to backfilling that through the MFP as well. So there's a high probability that not only would this allow the savings, but they would actually backfill to provide that opportunity for the EEF fund distribution. I think in part because they're saving money on the MFP because student population overall across the state has dropped significantly. So when you consider the budget, the state's budget for MFP allocations, they're projected to save $13-14 million next year based on the declining student population. So the thought is to use some of that savings that they had already targeted for MFP to backfill it with some of the monies that would be lost through these EEF funds. So it could be a win-win all the way around, because I think some other discussion out there is that, okay, we're losing higher ed's losing these funds, so is public school systems. The amount of savings way far more benefits us than it would be to keep it the way it is.
Thank you, Dr. Orley. Thank you, Ms. Gregson. Any more questions about the second area that's kind of up for ballot? No? Thank you. All right, moving to the last page. This is the current legislative session. Items that have been tasked in terms of review, in terms of impact to the school board, that kind of falls in this year's session under three primary areas. The bond and tax election dates criteria, where there are some movements and some amendments in play, or some legislation in play to basically try to align any of our bond and tax elections to align with previously scheduled elections, meaning your standard fall dates in so many words. There's two bills in play, both two in the House and actually three in the House that are very similarly aligned in terms of trying to get those bond and tax dates aligned to those kind of the master calendar. From the school board's perspective, our current position is pretty much against those because that gives us, it takes away our doing the most movement. The other ones that in terms of what I've been seeing and following in terms of tracking progress, have not made too much out of the committee level, which is hopefully at least a good stance for the school board. The next area is more about homestead exemptions. Oh, sorry, forgive me. Any questions about the bond and tax dates before we move forward? Sorry, the next area is about homestead exemptions, and these appear to be some of the reoccurring or items that come up on a fairly common basis. Some of them are a matter of just expanding the homestead exemption by minimum amounts up to like 5,000. Some I've seen, some of the bills are up to like 22.5, which is almost in essence tripling the homestead exemption. Other bills that have happened are also just a matter of modifying what we refer to as special assessments. Those people who have reached various age groups or disability groups or military groups, first responder groups. There are some additional bills, that's 514 and 961. There's some additional modifications to allow them some relief, if you will, in terms of some of those movements. Again, in terms of movement, what I've seen on these is still kind of in the House in ways, various committees and things. The largest one, I believe, I hadn't seen final word on that, but I think that was possibly defeated. That was the 22.5, at least in terms of the current legislation. So we historically have been neutral on these because of the net cost savings that could happen to our residential and some of our commercials, but we just want to make sure that we're aware of those as those calculations come to play out in our ad valorem and collections and future projections. We want to make sure we're staying on top of those. Any questions about the homesteads?
The two homesteads did not make it out of Senate committee last week.
Thank you. Thank you for the update. And last but not least is House Bill 521. This is about millage levies. This is more about putting a constitutional amendment in play, and this would, again, have to go before the voters in terms of a statewide election, but this would give all taxing entities the ability to, in so many words, go back to a previous maximum without having to go through a full reassessment process. It's not as critical as like a roll forward in so many words, but it's very similar in nature and structure. So it gives you some additional flexibility. So we are for this one, strongly for this one, because it gives us the ability to go back to a previous existing maximum, even in the event that of a decline or an increasing property value state, which means you'd have to think about moving your millage assessments down. This would give us some more flexibility to push that back up to a previous maximum. That one has, again, still in committee, and it hasn't really moved too much farther out of that, based on my awareness.
Okay, just for clarity on this one, and correct me if I'm wrong, the purpose of this, or the spirit of this bill is it actually saves voters. And the reason I say that, because this came up several years ago, because right now, when you get to the end of that 4 years, if you want to keep that authorized millage, and correct me if I misspeak here, you have to do that at the end of the 4 years. This would say you don't actually have to do that at the end of the 4 years. You still have the ability, but only do it if you need it.
Correct.
Because right now you got some taxing bodies that are increasing every 4 years to recapture it, only to recapture it when only they're collecting money that they may not need. And it's an education piece for voters, and that's why I say it out loud for the purpose of the public.
Appreciate you.
If is that, I mean,
That's in alignment with my understanding as well.
and I don't think, again, we got to think statewide when we look at these. It's not St. Charles Parish, but, so go ahead.
So to your point, I mean, there are 4 millages that represent, right, Avalon for us. We have, and we've operated this way, the flexibility to modify those maximum rates by alternating which millages the board chooses to roll forward or back, or whatever it may be. So you're right. So instead of going through that process right now, based on what we're assessing our millages at, this would eliminate that. We wouldn't have to do the whole jockeying back and forth, right, to come up with the overall rate that we were assessing at. We would continue. You'd just be able to continue to operate how you would want to, without having to go through that whole process.
At the end of the day, it's a benefit to communities, to voters, to businesses, to everybody, because you have taxing bodies that are doing it because they have to do it.
Or what if you only had 1 millage, right? And I think that's
the
just
other
exactly what you're saying, because
smaller.
then they would be forced to go to the max, and then just the next year, for 1 year, drop it back down. So that's a good point.
That's right.
Thank you, Mr. Gregson.
Mr. Gregson, I have a question, going back to House Bill 440, all the homestead exemptions. What was the conversation about in the Senate, or why I didn't make it out of there?
So
what were you hearing?
No, I'm glad you asked the question, because we can clarify some misconceptions that were on social media. Business groups were not against it, actually. The problem is, and it goes back to what I just said a minute ago, is when you look at state legislation, we have to look at the reason they're doing this for the benefit of the state. We had 64 parishes. St. Charles is an anomaly. Or if you just look in the region here where you have the industrial development and you've got some of the growth, and when you look at your tax rolls, the majority of it is say ours is what, 90% business and industry. Not everybody's in that boat. So if you were to roll back Klein-Peters, Klein-Peters bill or Senator Miller's bill to go up to that, right? The bill it was very similar to local the inventory tax. It gives you the ability. You don't have to, but many of the parishes, like I think one of the senators mentioned Grant Parish. A lot of the property there is federally owned property. They couldn't. The majority is homestead. It's actually residents, not businesses. Does that make sense?
So if they lower it, then they lose it.
Well, the majority of their taxes, so it's basically the reverse of what we have. So it's more like probably 90, and I don't know, not Grand Parish, but there's the tax roll is majority residential not business industry. So, but I mean, I would support personally, I would support the ability, but they didn't have a lot of support for it, let's just say. They really didn't, and businesses were not against it. So I can send you the clip.
Thank you,
Okay,
Mr. Gregson.
if we're good to move on to the next agenda item, long-term financial projections as well as budget to actual. And Mr. Neighbors, before you actually start discussing this portion of it, just kind of give us, the board, a quick update on the interim, preparing for the interim budget at hopefully the next meeting.
That is the hope, yes, sir.
Okay.
Yeah, steps are being taken, conversations are being had. I'm still meeting with a lot of various department heads and then preparing school budgets as well to make sure that we're on track for presenting an interim budget to you as soon as is feasible, but I also want to make sure that we're taking our time to go through those numbers carefully so that, we're, in so many words, a little bit more conservative than predecessors and making sure that we are considering all factors and making sure that we're, in so many words, trying to capture as much as we can, especially considering a lot of the efforts our departments have made to identify and reduce those areas, kind of like what we went through the revised budget process. They have made a lot of progress and doing their best efforts to identify and reduce those items, or at least delay, defer in the efforts of Mr. Rome's processes, delay, defer, and so many words, move where we can. So we're trying to make sure that we're getting those interim numbers as comfortable as possible, and we'll get that to you very soon.
And just so you know, it's part of that process now. Each department chair meets with me prior to meeting with the business office, and we literally review line by line item, the expenditures for every department and schools. Once they facilitate that process with me, then they move on to Mr. Neighbors to make sure the accounts, the line items are documented in such a way that it'll now allow basically site-based management of those budgets in a more detailed and efficient way. And parallel to that, obviously, and we're about to talk about projections, until we have a firm interim budget, right? What Mr. Neighbors will present is very, very conservative from that standpoint. At the same time, understanding we still don't have our interim budget for next year, right? So, Mr. Neighbors, if you want to take it from here.
Well, Dr. Artland and
Yes,
Mr.
ma'am.
Neighbors, just real quick, when you're saying soon, do you mean like tonight, Wednesday? You're talking about next month? Because we're rolling into May, and here's June and July 1. So I just want to make sure, and I think I can speak as a board, that we want to make sure what we have in front of us, that we're able to go through it, in enough time that we can provide feedback as well.
Yes, ma'am. The hope is at the latest, our current estimation is to have it before the May, or at the latest is by the May board meeting committee schedule. If I can get it done and finished before that point, we may have the ability to call a special session, depending on the timelines and the advertisement and things of that nature. We want to get it to you as soon as we can, but also abiding by the same advertising and the same structure that we need to for public input as well.
Yeah, and look, I appreciate the thoroughness. I really do. I'm just making sure that we all have enough time that we can adequately report back to our constituents who are very much aware of what's going on. And I want to thank Dr. Artling for being very clear on the messaging, because that really, I know where I live, that has helped tremendously. So thank you. I mean, not that I'm pushing, but I'm pushing, just trying to.
Thank you so
I think
much.
he feels that pressure from the superintendent as well, and from all of us. But at the same time, and also kind of along the same line, Eisner-Amper has indicated to us that they're close to being able to provide a more summary of phase 1 and 2 relative to that. And remember, that is also our validation of where we feel like we're going to be moving forward. So that's kind of tied to that as well. Yes, ma'am.
Just a small revision, since I'm looking at the agenda, the budget to actual is actually going to go before the committee tonight as a part of the attachments in the accounts payable process. So that I was going to put in front of you, but it is in the executive staff section for a committee if we'd like to go through that. But I would like to focus more on the long-term projections, because that's a little bit more detailed and it's going to be a little bit more comprehensive in terms of reviewing the discussion. What you have in front of you, you have seen a little bit of this before, using some of the previous format, but I have provided 2 different versions for discussion. This is the format that was historically used by the chief financial officer in terms of setting up the projections for the next 5 years. The two versions that you have in front of you are version A and version B. Version A is, there in so many words, the more conservative version, stripping out a lot of some of the unknowns or the unanticipateds or the ones that maybe lean a little bit too far into the future of things such as projects that are coming or sales tax and ad valorem things that are, in so many words, not quite finalized or maybe not sufficient enough in their documentation or the progress to truly put them onto the register or in our projections. So version A is the slightly more conservative, or dare I say, much more conservative version of where I think we could land in the next few years. Version B is the slightly more optimistic, or if you want to use the aggressive version. Just to give you a quick reminder, these are sheer projections, just as Dr. Orling said. These are not officially based in the budget to date. These are not going to be, you know, we may pull from some of these estimations and some of the guidance that Ms. Janson and Mr. Troxler provided me as we formulate the interim budget, especially when it comes to revenues. But these have not been formally established or put into our budget projections yet. They are getting there, and I'm still making sure to evaluate them fairly and you know, consistently before we consider them and move them into our budget. So I'm going to go through version A first and kind of open the door for any questions, and then we can kind of go through version B and kind of show you some of the highlights and the differences where things happen. As you can kind of see, version A, everything in the actual on the first summary page, everything in the actual ties back to our audited financial statements. That all the revenues were tied out, the expenditures were tied out. That surplus deficit, as you can see, was one of our largest and most significant deficits we've had in a very long time. And that kind of, as you kind of see, it kind of walked our general fund balance down. The other reminder is this entire set of projections is just for the general fund. This does not include capital projects. This does not include any of the debt service or any of those special revenue grant funds. So this is just the primary operations of the school board. So general fund meaning primary instruction, salaries, benefits, health insurance, all of those things are in this discussion. So focusing on the actual, you can kind of see the historical, the growth in the revenues, the growth in the expenditures, and then the change in the fluctuations in the deficit, as well as the fund balance to date. This is the more aggressive, or the more conservative method. So as you can kind of see, as we walk forward, you can kind of see some of the projections of where we think we're going to end up for the first 26 fiscal, which is pretty much aligns very closely to our revised budget that we presented to you a few weeks ago. And then you can kind of start walking forward there. The growth in income is very moderate, to the tune of about 1% annually, plus some changes in millage that we'll discuss in a minute. But the growth in expenditures, you can see after 26, when we kind of take some of those historical capital projects and things and kind of, dare I say, discount those for historically expended money, we kind of start moving back towards the baseline and then a very reasonable, moderate increase year over year after that. And I'll explain a little bit more about those.
Mr. Neighbors, if I could just pause. Sure. And also when he's referring to as far as being conservative, previous CFO would oftentimes project, while he would say it was conservative and you know, in the recent review of things, a lot of his projections didn't end up falling to fruition, especially the last 2 years, as noted in a revised budget, which is online on Assembly from that standpoint. So Mr. Neighbors really has eliminated those things, almost acting as though there's minimal growth at all. So when he's saying conservative, that certainly is represented in this particular document.
Yes, sir. The hope is, in terms of conservatism, to, in so many words, undershoot your revenues and overshoot your expenditures.
And real quick, just to Dr. O's point, give us 2 examples of what you would be considering things that you're not considering that possibly were. Just examples.
Sure enough. In this version A, the conservative version, things like the sales tax for upcoming projects that have not yet broke ground, or the ad valorem projects that are, in so many words, possibly coming up in the future that could maybe manifest in the next few years. I did not want to build those in just because of the uncertainty and in so many words, as Mr. Gregson said earlier, until that shovel's in the ground, you really don't have a full estimate of A, if they're going to happen, and more importantly, when on the 5-year structure could they happen. Historically speaking, the previous version of these kind of had built them in and led to a slightly more rosy picture, and that was presented to you all in terms of where we could end up. And as you've kind of seen in the last few months, that did not manifest close to what was actually projected. So I wanted to, in some way, strip some of those estimates out so that we could start with what are our core operations, what do we know, and then work from there.
So where, when you get those quote-unquote estimates of tax projections, and you're discerning whether or not they should or should not be based on a conservative approach, where are those where are you getting those figures?
Obviously, with our two primary, being sales tax and ad valorem, I have had discussions and meetings with Mr. Troxler in the parish to kind of understand where he thinks the assessment levels are going to fall for this next year, and kind of doing some matrix of figuring out, okay, well, if our property total was X last year and he thinks it's going to be soft, or he's going to think it's going to increase, kind of working backwards, assessing on adding in our millage rates to figure out where we're going to land on those, and kind of validating against the assessments that are provided by that third party. And then the similar discussions like you heard from Ms. Johnson, talking to her, reviewing that historical nature and going, okay, well, in the grand scheme of things, if our trend is continuing and still up this way, I'm not going to book all the way to this level. My moderate level, when we get to some of the nitty gritty, our sales tax projections are only going to be about 1% growth a year. I don't want to go too far to, when she's saying, oh, we've hit 6%, that's fantastic. That is great news. But I don't want to build that into our projections as a guaranteed future-looking growth pattern. We kind of want a nice, even, steady growth over the course of the next few years.
Mr. Cody, I can probably answer your question.
Just one more follow-up. So the data that we're getting from the sales tax office, but it was my understanding, because what Ms. Johnson said was she's got more access to the data there. So in essence, we'd like to think that that is as accurate as it should be, as it's being presented to the board. But what I'm hearing is, now you're having to cull those estimates. And so I'm just wondering if we've got a division that has so much access, and at least for the last 2 years, and has given us data that we did not cull properly, it seems like maybe there's a disconnect there.
Understood. And I think, historically speaking, some of the data was, in so many words, looked at from this office's perspective in a different lens. And my discussions and my things, my understanding is gonna, I'm not gonna say rely upon, if she has the access to the data and things in so many words, all that structure that she's presenting, I think there was some more leeway granted by the previous role that I think pushed things a little bit higher than anticipated. And I'm in the strategy going forward, I am not going to be one to aggressively, overstate or push those numbers higher than they need to be. So I'm not going to say I'm going to rely 100% on that data. I'd like to rely more on that data because she has access to it. But I want to make sure that we're in agreement as to where those projections are going to lie going forward.
So great, excellent question. And I don't know, for clarity on your second to last question, was were you asking about the projection, the data projections on new projects or expansions?
Overall, I'm wanting to know if we rely on this number of everything that goes into this number that's being projected to us, be it things that are coming on board, things that are already on board, that are audits that are included. If that department has the tools that they have to get to a number, and it seems that we're now having to call that number or revise that number, to me, that's speaking to, I don't know, to me, there's a disconnect.
No, I agree with you
on that. That number needs to be, your philosophy and that philosophy it's considering it's a board position. I mean, we're funding part of that tax office.
Right. Mm-hmm.
There needs to be more alignment within those two. And it got out of hand and has put us into a position where we're not having to do extreme conservative views of it. Where my point would be, what's the point then?
No, you're right. And I was just going to hit on one thing, just for clarity for the board public. On any not turnarounds, but any expansion or new project, if they apply for an ITEP or some type of incentive, or LED has on their site, you can actually download, and it'll have projections in there of that project. The key part to this is, it goes back to what I said earlier, and Mr. Neighbors referenced it, it's when the shovel's in the ground. And I would even count it when the shovel first hits. Like, the sales tax, so the ad valorem piece that he mentioned doesn't happen until they go into operation. The sales tax occurs from that shovel on the ground to operation, when the material's being delivered, the use piece and all that. So I'm assuming, and I guess in here, some of those things were included in the projection. Some of that 8 to 10 years, kind of, that's where you're.
Yep.
Were those marked? Like, I mean, did you have to go in? Do you have to go and figure it out, or was it indicated like a company A amount, or do you have to go in there and play I Spy or something? I mean,
Thankfully not, but I will show you a little bit more detail when we get to
okay,
the
all
ad
right.
valorem page.
I'll just.
If I could just make, I'm sorry, go ahead, Mr. Weber.
I just want to know, are we considering, and maybe this might be down the road conversation, and I don't even want to say it, if the millage does not pass? I mean, are we projecting this in here? Is that, like, we're being very conservative, so when we talk about being conservative, are we considering that, or is that another sheet somewhere in here, an event that does, and I'm just trying to be, have a plan in place for everything. You know, we have an A and a B, what about that C?
C.
Yeah,
Worst case scenario.
exactly.
Right now, at this point, that is not explicitly in here.
Okay.
Just because of, yes, this election is, yeah, we still have 2 years to get
Okay.
that millage in some words confirmed.
Well, I see that, like, you know, like, you're 28, 29, 30, so I'm just thinking, you know, I saw some of those deficits there as you go to 29 and 30, so I'm just wondering if you did include that, you know?
No.
Okay.
The deficits that you see there are primarily due to the outstripping of expenses and primarily built by health insurance and other things of that nature, but we'll talk about those in a little bit. This summary tab kind of brings a lot of those factors into one easy, presentable place for you, but we can go through a little bit more detail and hopefully answer a few more questions for you as well. Okay?
I could just say a few things relative to Mr. Cody's question. When you consider the position that we're in, that was a result of us having a very high general fund balance. Where the projections came in that led to us, basically the cash flow becoming an issue, when we initiated those projects and those investments internally, they were based on future projections at that time. We're taking the approach now, right? And so then once those projects were underway, once those investments were already made, we couldn't turn back the clock. What we're trying to do now is be conservative in our estimates because there are variables that you can't account for. Sales tax, while it's been accurate the last 2 years, if we go through a major depression, if something else happens in the parish, sales taxes can fluctuate in a downward moment, as you saw on Ms. Johnson's chart. So until the money is in the bank per se, our goal now is to build up our general fund balance to account for the fluctuations that occur on a naturally occurring basis in this parish. So I wouldn't necessarily say Mr. Neighbors is taking a per se, I guess, different approach, but where the challenge was us initiating some of those things based on the future projections that didn't end up coming to fruition. So like this past year, as was presented in the revised budget, the shortfall relative to ad valorem was close to 14 million, right? Less revenues was it 14? Maybe it was 5. Okay.
And the general fund is
I'm
about
thinking
5
total. Okay. Yes. So I say that just to put that in context. So I do think Mr. Neighbors' approach is accurate because we're allowing for the fluctuating. We're not going to plan for projects based on internal controls and what you all provide direction for us as a board to move forward on anything that we don't already have the funding for and are confident moving forward we're going to have those recurring revenues.
All right. getting into some of the nitty-gritty. Mr. Cody, did you have more questions, or? Okay. Some of the nitty-gritty details about some of the individual items that support that summary. The ad valorem is on the next page in terms of estimates. And again, this was taking those historicals, you can see the actuals there, and you kind of see the trend. Ad valorems, based on my initial discussions with the assessor's office, the initial concern is that we might have a small reduction in this next year's tax roll of about 3%. So I did build that into the 27 structure. From there, from 28 forward, again, a very moderate growth strategy is employed, again, about 1%, and then this is where you can see some of those exempted properties coming off the rolls. And these line items, the 26 or 27 forward, have all been confirmed with the assessor's office as well in terms of this is what was presented to them in terms of the total cost at the time of application. What he did confirm to me, and what Ms. Paula also mentioned, is those applications were their best estimates of cost when they provided those estimates at the initial 10-year period. So even some of these estimates could be, once the project fully comes to completion and they apply for, in so many words, reassessment or understanding of where their property value is, some of these numbers could be modified up or down too, based on the end date of that project. So this is what was provided by the assessor's office based on those initial applications. And you can see how it kind of phases some bigger projects towards the 2030, 2031, and 32 as those, again, kind of walk off and come onto the rolls. So these are all considered when it comes to adding that, I'm going to say, additional ad valorem, but that amount that should be increased is built into some of these numbers. As you can see, that third bullet in the notes, new industrial projects are not included in this timeline. This is the more conservative effort. We're not depending on those unknowns, as we've mentioned. So I did want to kind of at least put a reminder that I'm not building in it for ad valorem, and I'm not building in those in this version for sales tax. And last but not least on this item, because of where we're at from a taxing base, we are kind of starting to review our processes in terms of where we possibly could need to roll forward. And right now, given where this election and everything may fall, we do have some capacity to possibly increase or roll forward our millages, at least on the operations and maintenance one, to the tune of 1 to maybe 2 millages at most. That's our conservative estimate. Based on what we know right now, 1 mill basically generates about $2.5 million of revenue. The timeline of that is none of that would be collected until the second half of the fiscal year for 26-27. So again, that's something that would not immediately help the short term, but that could be a long-term growth. So that kind of estimation, that 2 mills, approximately $5 million, is built basically from 27 going forward. And that's how some of you can kind of see the trends, kind of the 5 plus the 1%, it kind of starts, in so many words, building on itself as it moves forward. Sorry, Dr. Ron.
I'm sorry.
Sure.
Can you, just for the purposes of everybody here, about ad valorem, from the values of the ad valorem, especially on the business and industry side, not so much the homeowner side, just articulate how they, the values continually go down because they're not, in other words, the values don't necessarily stay there. So that's why you need the continual kind of expansion project and things. Because if you just stayed kosher, stayed where we are and not have any type of expansion or a new project, the value of this would continually go down, right? Because of depreciation.
Sir.
That's what, just so we are on the same page here.
Correct. Over time, various capital assets would depreciate, and then their fair values would also then depreciate as well. Houses, obviously, the market of property value tends to fluctuate and things of that nature, but when in terms of commercial value, those can fluctuate based on depreciable cost as well, especially when it comes to things like inventory.
The other thing I don't think Mr. Neighbors has included in this is the impact of Amendment 3, right? If Amendment 3 passes, then generally speaking, that's going to year over end will continue to increase the amount of revenue that we receive. So once again, the conservative approach is assume it's not going to, but if it does, then that's going to be a windfall for our school system at a higher rate than most other school systems because we pay more in interest because our salaries are much higher than most other school systems. So we will tend to gain more if Amendment 3 is compared to other school systems at a much higher rate.
And the Amendment 3 effect is considered and tried to accommodate in the version B that we'll talk about in a minute.
And oil prices are likely to stay high by the end of the year, so if they're high in the fourth quarter, inventory just went up.
Excellent. All right, questions on the ad valorem page before I move a little bit forward? Oh, let's go.
And so the 5.5 million difference in fiscal year 2032, just walk me through. So you've got 139,290 on A and 144,629. Am I looking at a different page?
Page 2.
It's higher on the right.
Yeah, it's higher on B. I'm just wondering how, like, what goes into effect on that? I'm looking at these.
Yes, sir.
He's got them side by side, so he's looking at both version A and version B.
Version A versus version B.
Haven't even got to B yet.
The benefit of.
Yeah, great copies, by the way.
For the copies.
Projects. Those are the additional projects that he had included in his previous projections that we were going to, like, the additional ad valorems, those additional sales tax items, like I said, those are those additional projects that, for the efforts of conservatism, I did not want to put in version A, but did want to include in version B as a slightly more rosy picture. I'm not going to say that I'm going to ever get to the picture that he had presented historically speaking, because that was rainbows and unicorns, as Ms. Johnson mentioned. But this version is a slightly more, much more conservative, and I did not want to put those items in here. That's when you can kind of see, we'll walk through those side by side in a little bit if you want. Would you rather do it that way and kind of walk side by side, or you want to go through version A complete?
My brain is side by side.
I think everybody's side by side.
All right. Well, let's back up just a hot minute and go back to the summary and do a little bit side by side. Side by side, that's where I'm going to say the differences start to be apparent. As Mr. Cody pointed out, the difference is when you get into the nitty-gritty, you can see 218 becomes 227 on the conservative method, but that jumps to almost 237 on the much more rosy method. And then it kind of varies from there in terms of totals. And when you get into the detail of the pages, that's where you can see some of the fluctuations. Projects coming on, projects being reduced, because a lot of these calculations are built on historical so that it looks at the previous year and then adds the percentage. So you have to make sure that you adjust and take those projects back off so it's not continuing to build on the exact same higher level over and over and over again. So you have to adjust and pull those pieces. Okay, you had an additional $5 million in ad valorem because of a giant project. Well, let's make sure that we back that off over the next year because it's not going to be a reoccurring type of growth. So you can kind of see the project B picture, or the version B picture. It does tend to start lending itself to a little bit more optimism. I'm hoping to land, in so many words, somewhere in the middle of these two. That would be our in the efforts of conservatism. You want to project and show, in so many words, worst case with some exceptions, and then on the slightly more aggressive optimistic, you show the opposite, where things are going to be in your favor. And I think that's unfortunately where we'd kind of landed, historically speaking. You want to hopefully land somewhere in the middle on these. And that's why I was trying to present both halves of the coin so that you could say, okay, well, are we trending this way down the I'm gonna say the lesser of the two paths, or are we trending towards the upper? My hope and optimism is that we continue to start making changes, at least on the internal side, so that the effects of any sort of external things that we can't control are to our benefit and not to our detriment. And things that we can do, at least internally, we want to capitalize upon.
Also, part of the budgeting process as well should result in less expenditures, right? We've already seen that with the revised budget. And I expect that based on my review with 3/4 of the executive staff, that it's going to be another significant reduction relative to expenditures. So that will be amplified. And should we see a surplus, such as in sales tax, where we only budgeted 2%, but is currently running at 6%, then those things are going to help us reduce our deficit, right, relative to cash flow, and eventually get to the point where then we're building back up our general fund to where we feel we're in a good place.
Stable.
feel too, just like we did with COVID, with technology and all that, that we're looking at what we spend now and we're realizing, maybe we really don't need this. We don't need. So in the future, we're going to think, is this something that we truly need to have, and that we can continuously modify that? So I'm like you, I think it's going to definitely fall I'm hoping right in that middle, not trending down, not trending this fast up, this quickly up, but definitely in that middle speed of the things that we've learned through our own budgeting, just like you would do in your own household.
Thank you, Ms. Weber.
Can I,
You're good.
I just want to kind of walk through a process a little, just in my brain and the way that it is looking at the differences in the two things, the situation that we find ourselves in, the projected, the actual. When I think about finance, when I think about money, when I think about budgeting, I am a big fan of the zero-based budget. I know that we can't do that in a school system because so much of our stuff comes in after the fact. So many of our IDA, things like that, they don't happen until after we have already paid it. I'm aware that that's not a process that we can go into, but it seems to me with how very vastly different these two pages are. Moving for plus should live, not, well, now we can afford to do landscaping, or now we can afford to do something different like you would in a house. We compare a lot to what a house budget looks like, but this is nothing like a house budget. It just is nothing like, it's nothing like the way your income comes in, and it's nothing like the way your income goes out. And you have a very hard job, and I do not envy that at all. But to have two entirely separate documents that say two entirely different things is what is sitting here concerning me.
Understood.
We've got to find a way to live in the middle of that.
And that is the hope. And that's why
Okay.
in the interim budget process, my hope is to land slightly towards the more rosy side, but again, with efforts of conservatism and revised and taking sure that we're pulling all those factors into play so that we're capturing what is actually proposed
Yeah,
to
if
happen
it's
this
in
next year.
unknown, it lives in the unknown world. If it is facts, it has to live in the facts. And we have to be able to work on a budget that is true, that is definite.
Thank you.
Okay,
I
thank you.
think Dr. Ortland said it earlier, personnel, instruction, compliance, and safety. So those are the four things we continue to model
We're
our
always coming
budgets
on the
from.
top.
Am I correct?
Absolutely.
So I think that's what we need to remember, and I agree with Ms. Boudreaux, whatever is a surplus, let's leave it at that. But we definitely need to continue to look at those four things, because that is what we are all about in St. Charles Parish, is those things right there. So I constantly go back to that when someone questions me about something, where does it fall? And I love that, so I can remember that, because it's very short, it's easy, and I can tell them it has to do with instruction, compliance, those are the things. So I think when we're looking at budget, and I know you do that,
Putting
is
it
to
through
make
that
sure that
lens.
we fall in within that. So thank you for that as well, Dr.
Great job,
Ortland.
Dr. Ortland.
That's our team. Real quick, though, I just want to make sure surplus really for us right now will go towards building our fund balance up.
100%.
I just wanted to
Yes.
publicly
This is
state that,
projected,
like,
only projected.
correct. And anytime we get that surplus, we're trying to get to the point where we felt as though we had enough surplus. If something were to happen significantly, such as an IDA, such as COVID, those kind of things, we have the ability to respond without having to go out and requesting for additional funds.
Absolutely.
Yes,
And
yes,
that
ma'am.
right side of these pages should be our most stable number. Like, we spend it down or we spend it up from this side, not from the other.
Understood.
Okay.
One question, and I apologize but the expenditures, which is kind of the one thing we can control, if we're looking at the projections.
Sure.
What is the reason that the Exhibit A, the conservative one versus B, like they feel like they should be switched, but so just what would constitute, is it, a $2 million decrease in expenditures in 2028?
All right. The expenditure side, on the conservative side, is going to be more aggressive because you want to propose more expenditures than you think, I'm going to say, project should actually happen. So what you're seeing in the version A is not discounting things. In version B, the expenditures that we wanted to start including other operations such as Amendment 3 that Dr. Ortling talked about, that potential savings to us in terms of trying to in so many words, reduce salaries and benefits in the bigger picture, not direct salaries and benefits, not direct salaries, because that would obviously scale up with the change of the Amendment 3 passing, but the benefit side, the payment of the liability in so many words. if that cost savings did manifest, there is an allocation or a very small estimate of, hey, look, if our salaries run anywhere, salaries and benefits run anywhere from 150 to 160 million a year, and that TRSL allocation saves us anywhere from about 0.5%. Again, even kind of conservatively there, because that effect has not been truly given or calculated by us. Even if that's 0.5% of 160 million, I kind of built in around 800-ish as a very rough estimate. I'm going to include those types of estimations in here just because, as we've been talking, those are not finalized yet. And that same kind of trends, again, you can kind of read the notes as to, what kind of assumptions were built in there. Very small growth, very 1%, in terms of moderate growth in ad valorem, and then the exemptions coming off, as Mr. Gregson mentioned. Those are all built into some of the calculations. You can see a little bit step by step. Sales tax, similarly, did I miss it? There's a page missing on one of my copies. Sales tax is also very similar in terms of very minimal growth. As Ms. Johnson mentioned, we usually budget or at least plan for a growth of about 1%. Anything beyond that estimation is a good result or a good year because of the variability. As you saw in her presentation, it could go up 5% one year, it could go down 5% or even worse. So we don't want to kind of rely upon those variations. So a very stable 1% growth is in sales tax. Version A does not have all those projects in it. Version B does. Am I missing a page? Yeah, I did. Missing a page. Yeah, no, I'm sorry. Yep, state and state. There's a page missing. Okay, it must have stuck together. There's a state page missing. Okay, state and other revenue. This is, again, other things like MFP and investment income and things of that nature, because MFP tends to be very predictable, at least in terms of the understanding of what we've been given historically by the state. I just kind of built that same estimation in with very, very little variations between the two. The only variations you can see is some adjustments for investment revenue because of the plans that we are planning to take upcoming in terms of cash flow. When you do have things like the RAN or the revenue anticipation notes, while that can help cash flow wise, at least on a temporary basis, you can also have that money invested short term, and that could boost your investment revenue on a short term basis as well. So there are some small variations in there. Total revenue.
Just also remind the board and the public, we've seen a 3 to 4% decline in student population in the last 5 years. Expect the same across the state. We mentioned earlier how the state overall is saving money on the MFP because of the decline in population. From that standpoint, our state revenues decline while we receive fewer dollars from the state compared to other school systems. You still have to consider that's going to be a decrease while our expenses remain relatively the same, but at the same time, a declining student population, generally speaking, although we've had special population increases, should also result in fewer teachers, right? Which is fewer salaries, so there's that yin-yang going back and forth between state and what we provide in supports to our schools.
Total revenues, again, you can kind of see the trends going in various different directions in terms of the conservative cases, slow and moderate growth. And then the slightly more rosy picture is some variability because of those projects. You can kind of see it go up and down, fairly fluctuating because of those ad valorem and sales tax. Total expenditures, that's where things kind of, in so many words, align a little bit with the credits like Mr. Cody was talking about in terms of the possible effects of those additional amendments. And the assumptions for expenditures are on the next page, page 7. Historically speaking, the discussion about salary increases was always covered by, in so many words, surplus discussion. That is not something, as Ms. Boudreaux mentioned, that's not something you want to build into your projections. You don't want to rely upon or have those in your models. So I pulled out some of that language. The calculations didn't really matter, but the language was not in alignment with where I think the board's direction will take us in the future. So I did not build that language into our assumptions. This first bullet. The previous language that had been previously presented to you about salary increases had always talked about, any additional salary increases will be borne by the surplus or be borne by general fund balance. That, as Ms. Boudreaux said, that's not something that you want to be, in so many words, a habit. That's not something that you want to base your projections on. Similar in terms of the historical salary increases that have been happening the last few years. Those are built into this budget because those are, in so many words, not reversible. Health insurance projections to grow about 7.5%. Flood insurance is about, or property insurance about the same. Flood insurance we've estimated about 5% a year. And then I've added in, for both cases, A and B, some inflationary expectations. We want to make sure that in the environment that, like Mr. Gregson said, in the environment that we're currently experiencing, just because we say we paid X amount for something, in 2 or 3 years, that price could change very significantly. And I want to make sure, we built in at least some sort of model for that in here. And then for expenditures in total, my growth factor, just because those are so large, my growth factor expenditures outside of these specifics is only about 0.5%, because 0.5% of literally 200 plus million is still about $1 million increase, on, cumulative, rolling forward and things of that nature. And the last 2 pages just, again, kind of summarize your surplus and then your general fund balance, which is all shown on that first tab. I apologize for throwing a whole lot of data at all of you. But I appreciate your side-by-side ability to follow and track along. Before I move on, does anyone have any more questions about conservative versus rosy? I appreciate it.
Yeah, Mr. Neighbors, I mean, in a very short period of time, you've done a very good job, you and your department, and to be able to provide us information for this particular meeting. So very, very much appreciated. As we've mentioned many times before, this is a period of time right now where we're in a lot of flux, right? Until that interim budget is made, we'll continue to operate on a very conservative basis relative to moving forward on a year in, year out basis. Those things will change with the hope, not hope, I don't like relying on hope, with the anticipation that we build up our general fund balance to a substantial level and continue to be able to provide the high quality education that we expect in our schools.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. Yep. All right. Any questions before I move on to the last official agenda item? All right. The last official agenda item is the investments update as of March 31st. I have provided, I know this blue and orange summary is similar in structure, but I did change a lot of the assumptions behind it. Number one, all data is as of the end of the previous months. All those statements have been reconciled, all that amounts have been posted. So the data that you see is as of March 31st. And that is mostly supported by the next 3 pages, which are the actual investment statement and copies. So these are, you can kind of see the actions and the transactions that happened during the course of the month, and some sort of reliability and variability in terms of, you can see at a high level what happened in those 3 specific investment accounts. Obviously, the meter account is the more the longer term holdings that we've talked about in the last few months. The building fund is kind of that kind of holding pattern in terms of the smaller amount, and then you can see the LAMP transactions as well. That's kind of our more operating cash basis needs, where all of our ad valorem went at the beginning of the year, and then we kind of continue to draw down. You can see when you start looking at some of these statements about how much is required to be pulled down on a month-to-month basis in terms of cash flow needs, funding payroll, things of that nature. So I did want to at least provide those documents physically to you so that there is some reliability, and those dates all are in alignment with March 31st. The last thing I wanted to mention was the projected revenue buckets. As you can see, kind of in the little sub brackets on the first page, those have been revised a little bit as well because of the position that we were in the fall, with those changes in the investment balances happening more rapidly than anticipated. Some of those investment projections needed to be revised, and they unfortunately were revised a little bit downward. So you can, if you pulled up some historical documents, you would be able to see that those have been tweaked and pulled a little bit more into a closer estimation where we're going to land for this year. Any questions?
I just really have a statement. I never need rosy. I need actual. Never need rosy. I want to know what it is. I want to know what it looks like. I appreciate you including the actual counts. That's important. I also know, where'd Art go? He left. I remember him asking something about this not too long ago, and it was, in the interest of knowing, we keep money in this because it makes us money while it sits there.
Yes.
When we don't have money in there, it does not make us money. So keeping money in here is important, because I know a question was asked about why do we move it? Why are we moving money around so much? Why don't we just keep it in one account? And that is why you move money around, because you want the money to make you money while you are waiting to use it. So thank you for this. I appreciate you including the account, including what's happening in the account, and then giving us a real picture. I was almost so
close.
not rosy.
All right.
Not
Any
my
other,
last sip of coffee.
I was just going to concur. Thanks for putting the accounts. We appreciate that.
sir, Ms. Graves?
And for all your hard work and sleepless nights you probably had, so thank you.
No comment.
That is just one example of some of the internal controls that we have made and required as part of the board's direction to be fiscally responsible when information is presented to the board in a public meeting or any meeting, same with superintendent, that those balance sheets are actually provided to document those balances.
Okay. The last couple items on the agenda are talking about topics for next meeting. And I want to at least put the open option to the board in terms of other items you guys wish to discuss or have me prepare. And the long-term financial projections is not going to be a quarterly thing unless you guys want it to be. This was more, that alignment, that report aligned with historical at around this time, and I wanted to make sure that you all had access to that data, especially
That was just
considering.
to have eyes on.
Correct,
I wouldn't need that
especially
every time.
considering the concerns that have been occurring recently.
I did just have one request real quick, because I remember something you brought up in the audit, in the internal audit. The board would be presented with a number, and then literally the next day, that number would change because of the money would move.
That is not
Yeah.
in here.
So I guess what I'm saying is, these numbers are from March 31st.
Okay.
I'd love to see what they are today.
The number you saw in terms of the LAMP transaction just happened this week in terms of payroll.
But it's just, you would bring that up, you would say, hey, look, you guys were presented this, and the very next day,
Yep.
this much moved out. So I think on something like this, where I understand it's got, we look at quarter numbers, but if we're seeing this number, when the paper's put in front of us and we're talking about it, I want to see, I would request a balance
morning.
that day. Yeah.
Yeah, and the other part of our internal controls is I now am the supplementary authorizer of any transaction of that amount. So I can tell you that balance is, we took another 10 million for this month's operating. So it is $10 million less, but certainly I totally agree with you that we'll provide as of that morning.
Because we also want to remember that, and this is not to, it is to speak to your office, not to you as Dr. Ken Ortling. It is to say, we need internal controls for everyone, always. So, thank you.
And it answers the questions of the public,
Yes,
which is a great point to Mr. Cody and Ms. Boudreaux. Thank you.
yes, thank you.
Adam, when is our next scheduled meeting?
I'm gonna have to double check my calendar on that one. We don't have one scheduled yet? Okay, we'll get back to you about that, Ms.
Okay, because if
Weber.
it's like before July 1, I don't think it is. I think it's next year. Right, exactly. I was gonna say, we need to add more time because I know we're looking at, but I don't think it is because we meet quarterly, so I think it is gonna be in the fall.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Typically, these meetings are an hour and a half, so we can transition back to that being an hour and a half. We do have our board retreat this summer, obviously, and we have 2 sets and possibly a special budget meeting specifically for the interim budget. So we'll be able to meet specifically on finances. Certainly, if there's a topic that you want to discuss before next year's first budget review meeting, then let me know or the president know, and we can add that to the June board retreat as well.
I just didn't know if we were gonna do something beforehand in the wake of everything that's happened. So that's all I wanted to do. And if we were, we needed more time, but if not, the fall is fine.
Yes, ma'am.
Another long-term projection you just mentioned, and we only do it this time of year. However, you get y'all's thoughts on this, but if something changes, right, good or not so good, I would say maybe bring it, right? Especially considering where we're at.
Yes, sir. And
Significantly, I mean.
I wasn't trying to minimize the report.
No, I know.
There are updates to it. As I said, in terms of
No,
my
I
first
know.
alignment with this process, this was the first one that came to mind. There have been others. I
got
just
you.
want to make sure you're aware of those.
Yeah,
So
yeah, cool. I
In the
appreciate
fall,
you.
if things change, you'll get another 10-page update.
Thank you, Mr. Neighbors.
Other topics for next meeting when we do have a next meeting?
Similar to the
Yeah. Yeah.
Of course, the sales tax update, long-term projections, investment update, very similar topics, at least those.
Depending on May 16th election, you might have some.
Yeah, and I would like to just see after July 1, what else we need to add on. So you might want to just send another email out and just say, hey, after July 1, what are y'all seeing? What would you like?
And also, just to remind the board, at your request at the last board retreat, I'm going to be providing an update on that 5-year capital outlay, how we see those projects trending, what we can defer and such. So kind of capital, but kind of financial, but that'll be at the board retreat, that update.
In June?
Yes, ma'am.
Any meeting conclusion, what worked and what better ifs?
Well, we did start by saying better if there weren't printed copies, but I think maybe evaluating what it is you're presenting, printed copies were helpful in this situation.
I think that the process could be that the chair, the executive chair, shall reach out to the chair of the committee to get their opinion on whether or not it should be printed or not.
Well, I love copies.
Becky's always going to say
Yeah,
copies.
because I make notes.
Yeah, I don't want to eliminate copies. I just think it needs to be requested if you want one.
Agree.
And just to cut down on
I
all of
agree,
that.
totally agree.
Of you two having to prepare the documents.
Can we,
That being said,
can we make sure that I think if we're going to provide copies, I mean, the electronic piece, just put it on board, same thing with to Mr. Al's point, the presentation sales tax.
yeah,
Thank you.
just put it on there and I can print it myself before I come.
We could do that.
If there's no objection, we stand adjourned.
All right. I call the capital improvement